So time is a key dimension in quantitative research. So because whenever we are doing such studies, there is a restriction, as I told you earlier, that we have a time domain. We have to work in a particular time domain. So let's suppose if we are doing our MPhil studies or even our PhD studies, there is a lot of pressure of time, because we exactly know that we have to complete this work in a given frame of time. Or even if we are doing some professional studies, even then we have some time limits, which is very important. So keeping time in mind, you have to have various approaches. Number one, that is called cross-sectional studies. Observation of a sample or a cross-section of a population are made at one point in time. Most surveys are cross-sectional. This leads to common criticism of survey research, that is, it is unsuited to the examination of social processes. So one thing which you normally do is called cross-sectional studies. What is meant by it? That what we do it that we have some observations at one point in time, and other maybe we conduct that also survey on other population set on other point in time, and then we want to relate it. That is why it is called cross sectional. So we have various studies at various different point in times, and then what we try to do is we try to relate them together. So that is called cross sectional study. So this leads toward a criticism normally, and that criticism is what that is unsuited to examination of a social process, because that social process exactly happens within a time frame. So in that particular time frame, we want to know exactly how people react to a situation. So let's suppose if we have a cross section studies conducted at various point in time with various groups, then their let's suppose their level of understanding or whatever they feel about it, they might change. For example, let's take last year example, when this COVID situation started in January, February. At that particular point in time, I myself, and as a teacher, and you as a student, you might think differently. Let's suppose in March or April last year, and then as it continued, we have different approaches, we have different understandings about that particular problem, and our point of view might change over a period of time. So that is something which normally it happens when we go for various cross sections. So longitudinal studies, these permit observation of the sample population or a phenomena over an extended period of time. Because it is longitudinal, so we exactly know exactly, we have an extended period of time where we want to see it continuously. For example, let's suppose for 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days. These enable analysis of change. They may also facilitate more credible assertion related to causality. So normally longitudinal studies are very much relevant in researches, and there because we go with an extended period, so we can also analyze the change, how that change is being adapted over a period of time. Because it's a longitudinal study, let's suppose based on 6 months, 8 months, continuous 8 months, continuous 12 months. So we exactly know how it changes over a time, how it was there in January, then how it was in February, how it was in March, maybe, or different weeks, or in different quarters might be. So we can study the change in behavior, or the change in observations. They may also facilitate more credible assertions regarding what? Regarding causality. So this will really help us to come out with the causality. What is causality? As we have also discussed this in the previous lectures, that whenever we talk about causality, it means that we study various causes and see that how those causes have an impact, and what are the effects which are there. So if the other dimension is what we call it, the diagnostic approach. There we talk about where what we do is that we also study causes, but there we talk about, we infer a cause from those effects. And obviously, if we talk about causal analysis, there we have a different approach. There we see various effects and see that how those causes leads to those effects and how they are interrelated. So in longitudinal studies, it is easier to do this. It is easier to handle the causality, because the reason is that is it is spread of a time. So it means it is in a span of time. So it takes let's suppose 1 year, 2 year, maybe 12 months, 14 months, 15 months to conduct that study. So trend studies, cohort studies, and panel study. So what is trend study? That is also a longitudinal one. This examine change within the population over a time. For example, we have given the example earlier on, that is regarding census. Obviously, census is very important for any country, because we want to know exactly how many people we have, and so that we can manage the resources for those people, and we are planned our activities at the government level. We can arrange those finances and everything. So trend studies really help us to know that how there is a rate of change, what is the rate of change, and how the population will change over a period of time. So that will help us to have that information with us, that how the population will grow over a period of time. So cohort studies, these examine over a time specific subpopulations or cohorts, often although not necessarily the same individuals. Example, study might interview people aged 30 in 1970, 40 in 1980, 50 in 1990, and 60 in 2000. So these are called cohort studies. Although these also examine over a time period or a time specific domain, but here we are focused on subpopulations. And when we say subpopulation, it means not necessarily the people or necessarily the same individuals, but there are different individuals might be. So we have conducted first study. Let's suppose we have taken the population age less than 30. In the next cohort, we take from 30 to 40 maybe, and then from 40 to 50, and then from 50 to 60, and 60 to 70. So we have taken the subpopulation on different time periods, and there we have divided it. So that is called cohort study. That can also help, because sometimes we cannot take all the groups at the same time. We can also plan cohort study, and we can have better results if you have in your research design. So panel study, these examine the same set of people each time. Example, interview the same sample voters every month during an election campaign. So keep track of the same individuals. That is called a panel study. So in such a study, what we do, we keep track on those people. For example, um, let's suppose we want to see the impact of a new vaccine, or whenever we have a test of those vaccine on the people, what we do, we examine the same people over a period of time. So we registered those people, we give incentives to those individuals, and since the first dose from the vaccination, what we do, we examine them repeatedly over a period of time, the same individuals, and to see how, for example, what type of change which might be observed over a period of time. So till that matures. For example, here there is an example of an election. So what they did, they let's suppose they opted for, let's suppose, 1,000 or 2,000 individuals, and they started interacting with them before the elections, and they continued interacting with those people until after the elections, and then see the results, how those people have reacted to those various situations over that period of time. So that is called panel studies. Survey design issues, it is a form of implementation, thinking about who or what you are researching, case, population, sample. When we talk about design issues, survey design issues, we have to think about implementation, how we will implement it, how we'll reach out to the people. There are various methods of doing this thing. For example, in this world nowadays, we talk about ICT. So we have a lot of ICT based approaches. Let's suppose we have we might design a mobile app for that purpose, or You can design a Google form, and then you can interact with the people. You might use the Facebook channels for that purpose to collect that data, or in the traditional manner as well, where you have a paper format and you can reach out to a certain population and you try to that format to be filled out. So various ways of implementations. Uh, so uh, who will be the subject? That is also important. That who are your subject? Decide about subject. Decide about cases, about population, and think about sample. What sample is required? Whether you go for non-probability samples or probability samples, that is also important in that case. So either you look for the probability samples or non-probability samples. What is the difference between these two? When I say the probability sample, then it means the chance of selecting an individual from any population set is equal. So it means you use some sort of probabilistic method to collect that data. And otherwise, if you are not using the probabilistic method, then it's up to you that how you can pick out those individuals. And obviously the next important thing is the sample size. The sample size, again, it's a variable factor. It depends upon the population you have. uh, in some cases, there might be the sample size of 200, 300 is enough, but in some problems, might be even 20,000 sample is not enough. So it all depends upon the problems you are dealing with, what type of sample is required, whether you are dealing with image analysis problem or image recognition problem, whether you are dealing with some sort of statistical inference problem or probabilistic modeling problem, for any, for example, real life issue, or you are dealing some social problem. So it means how that sample size will be determined. It based on the type of problem you have. Obviously, a good size is recommendable. Optimal size is recommendable. If your sample size is too small, then it is difficult to make an inference out of it. That might not be acceptable. And if you go for a very big sample, then it will take more resources. It will take more time. So you might get yourself into trouble. So you must know that what is the optimal sample size. Uh, some general points. Typically, individuals are the units of analysis. It means this is not always the case, though. For example, in a survey of schools, obviously, whenever we go for survey, most of the time we are dealing with the individuals. That is our unit of analysis. For example, you want to study the impact of online teaching during this COVID situation. So there, you obviously you look for individuals who are teaching online. For example, the teachers who are teaching online. So you try to find out various individuals, and then in your study you will focus on whether you talk about postgraduate teaching, or you talk about undergraduate teaching, or you talk about school teaching, or even teaching at the primary or secondary level. So individual referred to as respondents. So those are called respondents because those individuals are taking part into the survey. They're providing the information based on the questions which you have in your survey. So the research instrument used to gather data is often referred to as questionnaire. So we have to develop those questionnaires. That is a very important part of a research design, or a sample design, or a survey design. So whenever we have want to collect some data from the people or the individuals, we need to have an instrument, and that instrument, the best instrument we have is the questionnaire. Develop the questionnaire. How we will develop the questionnaire, that is a different point. That is a different ball game, because there you have to divide your questionnaire into various parts. You might be interested in some basic information or demographic data. You might be interested in some information regarding the variables which you have identified, and on the basis of those variables, what type of information is required. You actually convert this into questions from where people can, and that normally those are close-ended questions, and you come out with options as well, so that people can easily respond to those questions. You might ask some open-ended question as well, because those questions cannot be translated in terms of options. So normally whenever we have a question and design that has a specific standard. So whenever we go for the literature review for a certain problem, you might find out various questionnaires that will really help you to design your own instrument. Rather than copying a questionnaire, use information from those questionnaires and refer those research papers in your work. Questionnaires, interview schedules, how you will look, how you will execute it, uh, how you will collect the information, how you will make a schedule. It is also a part of it, a survey design. So you have to have a standardized information, and obviously you will make a timetable for that, and how you will execute it, how much data is required in a given time period, and how you will interact with those people. These types, there are three types of surveys. Number one, that is called self-administered questionnaires, which includes mailed surveys. Normally, in the past days, people what people will do is they mail the questionnaire to the people, and then the people respond to it and they send it back. In the old days, because at that time we did not have the ICT or internet, and it was difficult for people to collect that information, because it is always difficult to reach out physically to each individual to have that data. So therefore, even in let's suppose you want to collect data from here, sitting in Karachi, and let's suppose you want to collect data from Lahore, from Gujranwala, from Islamabad, from Peshawar, it is not possible for you to go everywhere. So you have to reach out to those individuals who are living over there by using various snail mail approaches, or couriers, or the regular mail service. So normally people opted for web-based services nowadays. And what we do is that we design our survey and we put it on for example, we put it on the Google survey, and we provide link to the people, individuals, having descriptions there, having the description on the top of the survey, and the people will easily access those surveys. They take part in that survey, and that data is translated into your sheet automatically, and that saves your time, and obviously you have a quick representation of the data. You can also perform group surveys as well. So instead of having an individual survey, you also go for a group survey. For example, you might go for a class, maybe a class of, let's suppose, 60 students. You might take a class, whole class at one time, and you can perform a group survey. Interview surveys is the second kind of survey, that is called face-to-face interaction. So we need to have a face-to-face interaction as well. For example, even in computer science, if we are working in various applications, we need to have that interview surveys. For example, let's suppose if you want to develop any prediction-based system for financial institution, so you need to interact with the people over there who know the financial matters very well, and there are companies who are operating in that particular scenario. So we have to interact with those people. Normally we call it domain experts. So we have to interact them individually in an interview, because it is not possible for us to have a questionnaire for them, because we have some specific questions, and that those questions may connect with the other questions as well. So you want to have the clarity. So if you want to have that clarity, you need to interact with face-to-face interactions. Telephone surveys is also a kind of a survey, but here we use technology to connect with the people. Nowadays, we are also connecting through uh, online conferencing tools, and we are conducting interviews, for example, by using Zoom or Microsoft Teams and other video conferencing tools which we are having. Okay, so the next uh, is about method. Number one, self completion. How you will go about it. Advantages: that is cheap, cover the wide area, anonymity protected. You interviewer buys There is no interviewer bias because there is no interference of the interviewer, because it's a self completion, because I am doing it myself. So there is no bias, because otherwise, if you are interviewing someone, you put question in such a manner, you need whatever the answer you want, you actually have that answer. So you come out with your own bias. But in self completion, that is the advantage we have. People can take their time, because as their availability they can do it, because it's a self completion task, so they can do it. So disadvantages: low response rate and possible bias from this, because there is, if you reach out to people and let them do and let them decide whenever they want to fill it. So sometimes they just say, okay, whenever I have a time I'll do it, I put it aside. So sometimes we have a very low response rate. If you do not have a connection with the people, if you are not well connected with the people will not respond to it, or they think that it's not relevant to them, or they think it is wasting their time or something. They do not treat it, on priority. So that is the problem we have. Question need to be simple. Otherwise, the other problem is, you might ask some questions which are very difficult, and it is very difficult for people to respond. And you might ask some open-ended questions, so the people are normally reluctant to provide answers in paragraphs or in description, because it need a lot of time, and they have also a reservation that why they come out with their response, or why they give their own information in detail. So normally we have to have a very structured questions. No control over interpretation. No, there is no concept of interpretation, because you have a clear, you have some clear options. So whatever, wherever the option is picked, that is the pick. That is, there is no interpretation of that. No control over who fills it. Whenever we have sent these forms to the individual, sometimes we don't know exactly whether he or she filled himself or herself, or maybe other person might fill it. So the evidence is not there. Tips to remember: simply simplify the questions, including covering letter. Always write a letter. If you have a Google form, write on the first page, give the details, give a respect to the individual. Whenever you send that form to a respondent, may address it with his or her name rather than go for anonymous. Okay, always have a reminder system, and whenever you have that input, always acknowledge. So these are the things which we have to consider while we are conducting these studies. Okay. In the telephone surveys, the same thing. I do not go into the detail. The People have the chance to clarify the answers, of course, either on the telephone, or you can also say on the internet as well. Relatively cheap. People may not have phones or connectivity. Sometimes people do not have chance of a good connectivity. Even we sometimes do not have a good internet connectivity. There is a broken connectivity. Then you have a difficulty. Uh, Okay, and because we are interested, we are more reliable on the rely on the verbal communications. So we need to be time bounded. So we exactly convey those questions rather than going into the very details. Minimize the number of response categories as possible, and of course, it is not possible for us to conduct this activity for bigger sample size. That can only be possible for smaller sample size. Okay. Next is face-to-face interview. That is very important. So even our computer science research, sometimes we have to interact with the people. So face-to-face interview is a high response rate. That is the advantage we have. Because whenever you set an interview, the person if you are referring, or the subject you are referring, they exactly know that that time slot is available for you. So mainly they have a prior meeting setting and everything. So the response rate is good. uh, you can control the situation at that particular point in time, because if new question arise, you can easily handle it. You can easily handle the response. It is obviously expensive because you cannot go for interviews all the time because it needs a lot of resources. So it is expensive, it is slow, and it might take a lot of time. Important that interview is non-threatening. Interviewer can only clarify questions, but should be wary of elaboration that affect the content. Aim to ask questions in a clear, standardized way. So obviously, whenever you go for interview, prepare yourself. The good thing is to prepare yourself. You exactly know what information is required from that particular individual. So write your questions, list down your questions, and try to come out with those questions and try to have responses against them rather than asking other questions or irrelevant questions and waste your time, because otherwise you will not be able to meet again. So normally in interviews we are very much focused. We talk to a limited group of people, let's say domain experts, and then we need to know that their time is precious, and if we are well prepared, then we might have good responses. Nowadays it is also recommended that take prior permission from that particular individual to record the interview, because now we have those recording devices. So if that individual allow you to record the interview, then please go ahead and record that interview. That is very important because sometimes it is difficult to have all the information in a given point in a given time. So if you have the recorded interview, then it is easier for you to analyze later on, and also you can put it in the record. Okay. You must keep track of response rate calculated as the proportion of people who are selected to take part in the survey. That is, who are part of the desired sample who actually participate. That is the problem we have. Whenever we have a certain problem in our mind, we need to know that how many people have to respond. Sometimes we are too much optimistic, and okay, we say, okay, we have designed that survey and let's see, there will be thousands of responses, but that is not the case. So when you send it to the people might not respond, and they might not take part in the survey. So you must have a minimal number set in your mind, that how much minimum sample is required so that to execute that study. Okay, so you have that thing must be prepared. Let's suppose I have initiated one study last year, and I put it on the Google, and I reached out to the various people to fill it out. At that time I was thinking that I might have 500 responses, and if I have 300 responses, that will be very good for my research. Okay, this happened to me as well. So when I send it to the people, and I'm sending them the reminders again and again, hardly I have collected 148 samples, 148 responses. So I was planning for 500. The minimal set I put 300, but I put my all efforts, and even then I was able to collect only 148 responses. So that is the problem normally we have. So whenever we have a study in our mind, so we must plan for our sample sizes, how much sample size is initially required. Okay, so for different problems, you might have different approaches. Strength of survey research, useful for describing the characteristics of a large population. Of course, make large samples feasible, flexible. Many questions can be asked on a given topic. Okay, you have that instrument, and if you have that instrument in your hand, you can might ask the relevant questions as well, related to those variables, which are the part of the problems. But there is also something which is flexible. There is a high degree of reliability. It is relatively transparent process because you exactly have your instrument with yourself. You reached out to the individual replied to it. That is transparency. And you can reach out to the more people. In interview, face to face connection, it is difficult to reach out to the large population because of the time constraint. It is very difficult to reach out to the large population. So normally the people opted for the survey approach. or a questionnaire based approach. But there are certain weaknesses. I will not go with all the weaknesses we have, but I will just put some weaknesses in such sites in survey research. Number one is the concept of inflexibility, cannot be altered once it was begun. Because if you've initiated the survey, you have designed the questionnaire, it now we cannot change it because you have taken responses from, let's suppose, 50% and subjects, and then you change it. No, if you change it, then it is not applicable for all those 50 subjects. So you have to be very careful about it, because before making that instrument, make it final, and then reach out to the population. You cannot change it. Unlike interview, where you go for an interview, you have certain questions in your mind, and according to the situation, according to the responses, you might ask other questions as well. So there you have that flexibility. So, sorry. Subject to artificiality, the findings are a product of the respondents' consciousness that they are being studied. So the problem is, whatever the findings you have, it is the product of but the respondents' consciousness, because they know exactly that they will be studied. So they exactly know that whatever the responses they will fill, that will be looked on, and you will analyze it. So there is a concept of artificiality in it, because whenever I respond to those questions, that thing always comes in my mind. Okay, that my responses will be seen. That is something which is very common. So that gives some concept of artificiality. Okay. So if you are looking for complex information, it is not appropriate tool. If you are looking for the historical perspective, it is not a good tool. Or for example, let's suppose, can be sometimes weak in terms of validity as well. So it is difficult to validate it, because whatever the response I filled out, I filled out. How you will? There's no method by which I can validate it, that whether these are the correct response outputs or not. Okay. So thinking about what you are researching, case, population, and sample, each empirical instance of what you are researching. So if you are researching celebrities who have been in trouble with the law, if you are interested in fast food companies or other problems, like for example, homeless shelter and so on, so it means that you are studying a case. You are talking about an empirical instance of what you are researching. So you talk about a certain case, and obviously when you talk about a certain case, then you will look for the population. So all the theoretically relevant cases, that is also often referred to as the target population. So if you are looking for example, individuals having a clot after vaccination, so it means now you look for all those people who have this problem. So this is called your target population. This might be different from the study population, which is all of the theoretically relevant cases which are actually available to the study. So there might be 100,000 cases which are there, but you cannot reach out to the 100,000 cases. So you will go for the target population, not the actual study population. Sometimes you can study all possible cases, the total population that you are interested in. For example, homeless people using a particular shelter on Christmas Day, and you have the data of all the people. So there might be some study which is being carried out, and that data is available with you. So if that data is available with you, that is very good. If you have the data of all the people, let's suppose you want to study a certain behavior of teachers in an institution, and you have all the data with yourself. Or for example, you want to study the usability of various conferencing tools, online teaching tools, and that data is available somewhere where you have all the population set is available. So sometimes it is possible that you need to study all those cases, and the data is also available to you. Okay. So often you search for whole population because it is too big, and to do so would be too costly, too time consuming, or too impossible. For example, if your population is, for example, voters from Pakistan or voters from UK, so then you have to find out some of the cases out of it. So you need to select some cases based on a certain method from that particular population, and that is termed as what? That is called sampling approach. So if you need to study some of the cases, so you need to select those cases out of the given cases, and how you will select those, that is in fact the concept of sampling. So what you are especially interested in, what you want to find out, that is also important. The frequency with which what you are interested in occurs in the population, because sometimes we are interested to know what is the frequency, how many times it happened. Sometimes we are interested in the complexity of the population, what research method you are going to use, that is also important. How many cases you want or have the resources and or time to study. So because there is a limitation, so we have a limited scope. So in that limited scope, how much cases you can study. So these are some issues which you consider while you are looking for the sample study. And probability samples, number one, we call it random sample. A probability sample has a mathematical relationship to the population. We can work out mathematically what is the likelihood or the probability is the result found for the sample being within a given distance of what would be found for the whole population if we were able to examine the whole population. Such a sample allows us to make inference about the population as a whole based on the sample result. So probability sample is what? Normally the approach we use is called random sample. We select samples at random from the given population set, and then we make an inference, and we'll try to make such an inference which can also be applicable to the given population. So, but the important thing is that has to be random. So how you will select randomly, that is based on your own approach. And what method actually you will use for that particular thing, that is called probability samples. There is always a chance. So what we do is that the likelihood of finding out a certain element out of the given elements. So non-probability samples, formally these do not allow us to make inferences about the population as a whole because it is not probability based. So you cannot make an inference. However, there are often pragmatic reasons for their use, and despite this lack of statistical legitimacy, inferential statistics are often generated and are published. However, it is not possible to make such an inference, but people might use statistical inference or statistical techniques to give their own opinion out of it or the findings about the non-probability samples. So with this, I conclude over here, and this presentation, and I will continue this in the next lecture. Um Thank you so much.